I am really happy to see a number of my fellow travelers who've just come back with me from our travels in Morocco. It's great to see all of you here today. I hope everyone's caught up a little bit on sleep and started to get themselves back onto the calendar and the time schedule of being back home in Houston. It was such a great joy to travel with all of you, and it's wonderful to see all of you back here again for Shabbat. What we found together when we traveled in Morocco is that everywhere you go, you find the ancient residue of Jewish life. We know, most of us, of course, that the Jewish population of North Africa surged after the expulsion from Spain at the end of the 15th century. But even before that rush of panicked Jewish immigrants fleeing the king and his inquisitors, our people had been living in Morocco for hundreds of years. All in all, Jewish life has existed in Morocco for 2,000 years or more. 100 generations of our people have left its cities and towns strewn with Jewish artifacts. As we walked through the old Medina and Marrakesh, the Muslim call to prayer echoed off the red clay walls that still bore the remains of Hebrew writing. We ran our fingers over the surfaces of tarnished silver menorahs that lay amid the brass lamps and beaded necklaces in the market stalls, and we saw the elegant curve of a Purim Megillah, cased in silver filigree, resting half-hidden among the dusty wares of a street vendor. Some of these sights caught us by surprise, though of course it's not altogether unusual to catch occasional glimpses of the Jewish past in places where the Jewish present is all but gone. Throughout 20 centuries of diaspora Jewish life, we have left traces of ourselves behind in countless towns and villages, shedding small fragments of our families and our lives in innumerable kingdoms and countries. The Roman Empire sent us packing to the east and to the west. For centuries, the great cities of Damascus, Alexandria, and Baghdad were sprinkled with the remains of Jewish settlement. When we left our homes there, we built new ones in what we thought might as well have been the Promised Land in Spain and Portugal. And there we thrived for as long as the crown and the church would let us. And then came the Inquisition and the disputations and the expulsions and the exiles, and now the Jewish history of what we called the Golden Age can only be told in the past tense. This used to be a synagogue. That used to be a study hall. Once upon a time, hundreds of thousands of Jews lived here, but now they're all gone. When the Crusaders swept through Europe, they left behind a bloody smear, and the Second World War mopped up virtually everything that was left. It turned Eastern Europe into a Jewish cemetery, the only evidence of histories of Jewish life reduced to somber memorials, ownerless shoes, and locks of hair piled in glass cases. There's nothing new about this aspect of our Jewish story. In every age of history, the map of nearly every corner of the Western world has been dotted with the remainders of where we used to be. For as long as the Jewish people has been a people, the same melody has repeated again and again and again. Once there were Jews here, and now they're gone. In some ways, the history of Jewish Morocco is the same. Once there were 100 times as many Jews living there as there are now, upwards of 250,000 people. Once upon a time, it was a vibrant, busy, fertile hub of Jewish life and Jewish thought, where rabbis and mathematicians, philosophers and poets thrived in safety and security. And now, there too, most of the Jews are gone. They emigrated to Israel or to France or North America, prying their mezuzahs out of the door frames and leaving behind the graves of countless loved ones in search of safer or more prosperous new homes. But unlike nearly every other place I have been, every other place where Jews used to thrive and write and sing and pray, but now are no more, Morocco is different. Unlike Syria or Iraq or Poland or Lithuania, Morocco today is not a monument to dead Jews or a museum of what used to be. In his commentary on the Torah, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, a legendary Hasidic master who lived in Poland in the 18th century, wrote an extended reflection on this week's Torah portion. He focused on the section of the book of Exodus which describes the meticulously detailed process by which the children of Israel would unpack and reassemble the Mishkan, the portable and collapsible worship tabernacle where they would offer sacrifices to God during their long journey toward the Promised Land. Every time they stopped on their journey, the Israelites would carefully and lovingly unpack all the components of the tabernacle and then follow the same precise sequence of assembly to put the whole structure back together and prepare it for its holy purpose. The rabbi teaches that God's purpose for commanding the people to do this, to go through this same elaborate and exacting process in exactly the same way every time they changed locations, was not just because the final structure of the Mishkan was important. Obviously, the people needed it. Obviously, they had to have a place to bring their offerings, to conduct their rituals, to undertake precisely the steps necessary to draw close to God on their travels. But even more than that, he teaches, the process of packing and unpacking, the ritualized practice of making a new home in a new place, and then pulling up stakes again to encamp in a new place, and then another, and then another. That experience may have been even more important than the process of bringing offerings to God in prayer. He offers this beautiful and evocative illustration. He imagines that each time the Mishkan was taken apart and repacked for transport, a few nitzotzot, small shards of holiness, would fall away from it. Every time it was taken apart, it shed a few luminous sparks, tiny fragments of holy presence that would be left behind like a trail of breadcrumbs in the Israelites' path as they traveled. And then every time the Mishkan was reassembled, the people's joy and delight at having a renewed opportunity to connect with the divine caused the tabernacle to miraculously return to its full size and glorious completeness. But some of the nitzotzot, some of those holy sparks would remain behind, loosely scattered behind the children of Israel as they made their way toward the Promised Land. And the shards of holiness would stay there, waiting patiently for someone to stumble upon them later, to collect them from the places where they lay forgotten in the dust, and elevate them to the glory they deserved. The rabbi teaches that this ongoing cycle in which the sparks of holiness are shed by the travels of wandering Jews and then recollected by those who encounter them later becomes a sort of generator of spiritual energy which lights up the world and contributes to human revelation and redemption. When one visits Morocco, just as when one travels to any number of other corners of the world, one becomes immediately aware that this was a place in which great numbers of Jews once lived in comfort and ease, and in their absence have left behind an intangible sacred residue, a sprinkling of holy shards that bear witness to the past. But in Morocco, unlike anywhere else I have been, the bright sparks of Jewish history are shielded and nurtured, cared for with real reverence and love, not only by the few Jews who still make their home there, but also by our Muslim cousins who take great pride in the bright and noble history of Moroccan Jewish life. We met there with a young man in his 20s, a Muslim student who runs a volunteer organization for other Muslims who want to learn about and celebrate Jewish life and Jewish culture. We met with an imam, a scholar of Islamic history and theology, who spoke glowingly about Morocco's Jewish past and expressed his longing for coexistence and his appreciation for the Jewish spiritual tradition. We visited the Jewish Museum in Casablanca, the only Jewish museum anywhere in the Muslim world, established by charter of the king himself. More than anything, our time in Morocco was a powerful and stirring reminder That although the entirety of Jewish history is marked by periods of terrible and traumatic displacement and disappearance, not all Jewish absence is alike. We have left huge cities where our disappearance was celebrated. We've been evacuated from shtetls where our neighbors moved into our houses while the beds were still warm. We've been thoroughly uprooted and chased out of towns where Jewish culture is now the stuff of parody and mockery. But what we found on our travels through adventure, our travels through Morocco over the last week and a half, was exactly the opposite. Everywhere we went, from the bustling din of Marrakesh and the wide, clean boulevards of Rabat, from the dense alleyways of Fez and the air of Casablanca that was perfumed with wood smoke, saffron, and oranges. Everywhere we went, we were met with hospitality and respect, with appreciation for our visit, and with reverence for the centuries-old legacy of Jewish life that we carried with us through the streets. It was profoundly moving. And it's important to say that, especially during these days in this year, when too many Jews feel their Jewishness as a liability, it was a great, great joy. I know that I'll have more to share with you in the days ahead about my travels in Morocco, and I know that my fellow travelers will also be generous with their stories and their reflections and their hundreds of photographs. But I want you to know how powerful a reorientation it was for me, not only as the great-grandson of a Jew from Casablanca, but also as a rabbi, as a teacher and celebrant of Jewish life, as I've now arrived at an entirely new perspective on the way Jewish history and Jewish memory can be uplifting and affirming, even through the lens of centuries of uprootedness and exile. I was changed by this trip, my discovery of Morocco, and my discovery that even from the empty cavities that once held the scrolls of mezuzahs, even there, if you squint your eyes and look hard, you can still catch the faint glimmer of the sparks of God's holiness. May the Shabbat and the days ahead bring us times of peace, solidarity, and oneness with one another and with the world. Amen.